Frost is down. Leave her. Lieutenant Evan Hale said it without flinching, without checking, without verifying, without sending a single man to the edge of that ravine to confirm. Kate Morrison was alive down there, transmitting on a live channel, screaming his name through the wind, and he cut the frequency like she was equipment he no longer needed. Then he did something worse. He ordered his men forward at gunpoint when two of them hesitated. Two soldiers who wanted to go back, he stopped them with a direct order and a hand on his weapon. Drop your city in the comments. Subscribe and stay to the very end. What Kate did inside that enemy base will leave you speechless. The radio clicked once. That single click was the last sound Kate Morrison heard from her unit before the blizzard swallowed them whole, and she understood in that moment with absolute devastating clarity that no one was coming back for her. She was 31 years old, lying at the bottom of a frozen ravine, with her left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch every time she let herself look at it, and the only thing standing between her and death was a decision she hadn't made yet. She made it. She decided to live. But let's go back 12 minutes, because 12 minutes was the distance between the soldier Kate Morrison had been her entire career and the woman she was about to become. The mission brief had been clean. That was the word Captain Driscoll had used back at the forward operating base, sitting around the thermal imaging screens with hot coffee, steaming in paper cups, like this was a morning meeting and not a conversation about putting 6 people into a hostile winter border zone in near whiteout conditions. Clean. Single pass reconnaissance along the eastern ridge. Identify the Firebase Volkov installation's defensive perimeter photograph, the artillery positioning, and extract before first light. No contact, no engagement. Ghost protocol from insertion to exfil. Kate had nodded with everyone else. She had looked at the route on the map and seen what she always saw: the variables, the terrain, the places where things could go wrong. She had flagged the northern saddle as a potential exposure point. Lieutenant Hale had told her the intelligence assessment confirmed it was clear. She had let it go. That was the first thing she would revisit in the ravine in the long, dark hours that followed. Not to torture herself, but because her mind was a machine and machines process data whether you want them to or not. The insertion had gone clean enough. 6 soldiers moving in a staggered column through the kind of cold that gets into the seams of your gear and finds every gap like it has a personal vendetta against you. Private Reyes was breathing too loud on the left flank. Corporal Davis kept drifting 3 feet wider than formation. These were small things. Kate cataloged them and said nothing because Hale was running point, and this was not her unit to correct. She had been attached to this team 10 days ago as a technical specialist, brought in for her communications expertise and her experience with Russian military encryption systems. She was the reason they could intercept what Volkov was broadcasting. She was also, she understood now, the reason she had been brought into a situation she had no full picture of. Sergeant Mike Okafor moved up beside her as they approached the northern saddle. "You good, Frost," he murmured. She had gotten the call sign 3 deployments ago in an Alaskan training exercise that she had refused to quit even when the instructors had told her not asked, told to stand down. She had finished the exercise with 2 frostbitten fingers and a reputation that followed her everywhere. "I flagged this approach," she said quietly. Hale cleared it. "I know he cleared it." Okafor looked at her for a second. He had good eyes, brown and steady, the kind of eyes that had seen enough that they did not panic easily. "You want me to say something?" "No," she said. "Keep moving." That was the second thing she would revisit. They had made it 40 meters past the saddle when the first shot came. It did not come from ahead of them. It came from behind and to the left, which meant they had been flanked before they even reached the exposure point, which meant someone had known the route, which meant the intelligence assessment had been either wrong or something considerably worse than wrong. Kate registered all of this in approximately 1 second, which was the amount of time her body needed to drop. Roll left, bring her weapon up, and start scanning for source. The firefight that followed was not a firefight in any cinematic sense. There was no dramatic exchange of precision fire. There was chaos and cold and the sound of Reyes shouting something in Spanish that Kate could not parse because her own pulse was too loud in her ears. Hale was calling positions on the radio. Davis was returning fire into the tree line. Okafor had moved to cover behind a rock outcropping and was pulling Specialist Tan back from a completely exposed position with his left hand while firing with his right. Kate was identifying the communication signatures. Even in the middle of it, even with rounds punching through the snow, 3 feet to her right, her mind was doing what it had been trained to do. She was reading the tactical picture, and what she was reading was wrong. This ambush was too coordinated. The vectors were too deliberate. This was not a patrol that had stumbled into their insertion path. This was a reception committee. She got on the radio. "Hale, they knew we were coming. This is not random contact. These positions were prepared. We need to." The grenade landed 2 feet to her left. She did not hear the explosion. That was the strange thing she remembered afterward. The complete absence of sound replaced by a pressure wave that picked her up like she was made of nothing and threw her sideways into the dark. Her left leg found the edge of the ravine first. She felt the bone give not as pain initially, but as a structural failure. The way you feel a step disappear under your foot before the fall registers. Then she was falling, and then she was hitting, and then the cold was everywhere, filling her mouth and her collar and the gap between her gloves and her sleeve. And somewhere above her, the firefight continued without her. She lay at the bottom of the ravine and listened to herself breathe. Still there, still processing. Her leg was broken. She knew this with the precise certainty of someone who had done wilderness medicine training and did not need to look twice to understand what a midshaft femur fracture felt like. Her weapon had gone with her over the edge and was somewhere in the snow. Her radio was clipped to her chest rig and appeared intact. She had a sidearm. She had a medical kit. She had a knife. She had everything she needed to make a series of decisions, and the first decision was whether to announce herself. She opened the radio channel. "Frost to Hale, I'm down, I'm alive. I'm in the ravine at the saddle, I need extraction." Over. Static, then Hale's voice tight and controlled the voice of a man managing a crisis. "Frost confirmed position. Northern Saddle Ravine. Leg is broken, I'm mobile limited but functional. I need someone to pull me up." A pause. Not long, 10 seconds, maybe 12. But in combat, 10 seconds is a complete conversation, and Kate heard everything that was being said in that silence. Morrison. His voice had changed. The call sign was gone. This was a different register, and she knew it. "Our situation has deteriorated. We have 2 wounded, and we are under active pursuit. I am ordering immediate exfil on current heading." Kate stared up at the gray-black slice of sky visible above the ravine walls. Snow was falling. Beautiful, indifferent, endless. "Hale, I am alive and functional. I am requesting extraction. I am declaring you a field casualty, Morrison. I am sorry." The formality of it was the worst part. Not the content she had already processed in the 12 seconds of silence. But the formality, the way he put the language around it, like a uniform, like calling her a field casualty, made it something other than what it was. "Hale." Her voice did not shake. She would never forgive herself if it shook. "I am telling you I am alive. You have a legal and moral obligation to." This channel is going dark in 30 seconds for operational security. "I am sorry, Morrison, you were a good soldier." Were, past tense, already. "Hale." The radio clicked once, and then she was alone. She lay there for a period of time she could not accurately measure, long enough for the initial shock to process and the pain to arrive properly. And it arrived with conviction. A long, deep burning that started in her thigh and radiated in both directions upward, through her hip and downward through her knee, steady and relentless, and completely committed to reminding her of what she already knew. Long enough to understand that no one from her unit was standing at the top of the ravine debating whether to come back. She would have heard them. The snow was deep and silence was total, and in that silence there was only the wind and her own breathing and the distant, muffled sound of the firefight moving away, moving east, toward the extraction point without her. She was alone. She ran a diagnostic. This was not a metaphor. This was a literal, sequential military-trained inventory of available resources conducted in the dark, at the bottom of a ravine with a broken leg and dropping core temperature. And she ran it the same way she would have run it in any situation, methodically, without sentimentality, because sentimentality was a resource expenditure she could not afford. Left leg broken, mid-shaft femur probable. Movement possible, but load-bearing compromised. She would need to splint. Right leg functional, arms functional both. Head clear. No significant concussion symptoms beyond the ringing in her ears that was already fading. Medical kit intact. She unzipped it with hands that were starting to shake from cold rather than fear, and she found the field splint, and she did what needed to be done in the dark, with nothing to bite on but her own jaw clenched shut. She did not make a sound, not because she was performing stoicism, because sound cost energy, and energy was currency, and she was already in debt. The splint took 9 minutes. At the end of it, she lay back in the snow and breathed long and deliberate, the breathing pattern she had learned in mountain rescue training, the one designed to bring the nervous system back online after significant trauma. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Hold for 4. Again. Her mind, which had been running a parallel track through all of this, delivered a conclusion she had not expected. There was a way out of this ravine. She had seen it on the way down, or rather, she had felt it, her body registering it as she fell. The eastern wall of the ravine had a slope rather than a face. Not easy, not kind. But a slope could be climbed by a woman with 1 functional leg and 2 functional arms, and a decision that had already been made. She found her weapon. It had gone into a drift 2 meters from where she landed, and the barrel was packed with snow, which she cleared with methodical care because a packed barrel was a death sentence, and she was not interested in death sentences. She checked the chamber. She checked the magazine. She made the weapon ready. Then she started climbing. The eastern wall of the ravine was 12 meters. She knew this not because she had measured it, but because her body told her 1 arm pull at a time, each one bought with the currency of pain and the remainder of her grip strength. She used the butt of her rifle as a ground anchor. She used frozen roots as handholds. She used the splinted leg as a balance counterweight and not as a load-bearing structure. And every time she got that wrong and let it take weight, she learned it immediately and corrected. She counted everything. This was a technique she had taught herself in a long-ago survival course, counting as a method of keeping the mind present in a way from the larger equation of whether any of this was worth doing. 1 pull. 2. The root under her left hand is stable. The one under her right is not. Choose accordingly. 3. The wind is coming from the northwest, which means the exfil track went northeast, which means the enemy will be pushing north and west to cut them off, which means the path southeast is probably the least populated at this moment, which means she stopped. She was thinking about paths. Why was she thinking about paths? She crested the ravine wall and collapsed face down in the snow and breathed for 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, her mind organized the information she had been processing since before the grenade had taken her off her feet. The ambush had been too coordinated. Someone had leaked the route. The enemy installation at Firebase Volkov had prepared reception positions, which meant they had advanced intelligence, which meant the information had come from inside friendly systems. And the mission itself, the original mission, the one that had brought her specifically with her specific skill set into this specific area, had been about the installation's communications and artillery positioning. She was the communications expert. She had the encryption keys. She was also currently the only member of the team who was not heading in the wrong direction. She sat up in the snow and looked southeast toward where Firebase Volkov sat behind its perimeter somewhere in the white dark. And she understood something that she was not entirely prepared for. The mission was not over. She pulled up her radio and ran a signal test, keeping the transmission time short enough that it would not register as significant on any monitoring sweep, just long enough to know the radio was functional. It was. Then she pulled out what remained of her intelligence materials, the encrypted communication fragments she had been analyzing since the mission briefed out, and she looked at them with new eyes. Cold eyes. Eyes that were no longer thinking about extraction and rescue and the warmth of a forward operating base. She was thinking about what she knew and what that knowledge was worth and what it would cost to use it. The artillery data in those fragments was not historical. She had assumed it was historical position data from previous deployments, archival targeting information. But looking at it now, cross-referencing the timestamps with the mission timeline, she understood that it was not archival at all. It was current. It was a scheduled strike. Coalition forces were positioned exactly where the strike was pointed, and the timing window indicated the attack was set for, She checked the time. She counted forward. She felt something move through her that was not fear and not hope, but something more dangerous than both. Purpose. There were coalition soldiers at the end of those targeting coordinates. She knew their positions because she had seen the forward deployment maps in the mission brief. She knew the strike timing. She knew the encryption architecture that Firebase Volkov was using to coordinate the attack. She was sitting in the snow 2 kilometers from the firebase with a broken leg, a functional weapon, a working radio, and every key she needed to walk into the center of that communications network and take it apart. She was also the only person who knew that this strike was coming. Okafor would make it out. Hale would make it out. They would write their reports and debrief their actions, and Hale would note her as killed in action at the Northern Saddle Ravine, and that would be that. The mission would be classified as a partial failure contact made no intelligence retrieved 1 casualty. No one would know about the strike. No one would transmit the warning, unless she did. She sat for a long time, not because she was deciding the decision had already been made. She recognized that now it had been made the moment she had started climbing the ravine wall, but because she was organizing. She was taking the pain and the cold and the anger, and she was putting them in the places where they would serve her rather than consume her. She was taking Hale's voice, the formality of it were good soldier, and she was folding it small and putting it somewhere she could not see it, because if she looked at it, she would feel it. And if she felt it, she would lose exactly the kind of clarity that was going to keep her alive. She made herself eat. She had 2 protein ration bars in a vest pocket, and she ate both of them with the systematic joylessness of a machine refueling because the machine needed fuel, and nothing about this was going to be about pleasure for a long time. She made a second rougher splint from material she harvested from her pack, reinforcing the first one enough to allow limited weight bearing if she was careful. She packed her equipment. She checked her weapon again. She pulled up the firebase's position on her navigation unit and calculated a course that kept her inside the terrain. Dead ground, the low ground, invisible from above, invisible from the firebase's outer perimeter for as long as possible. 2 kilometers. With a broken leg and a blizzard at night moving toward an enemy installation rather than away from it, she stood up. Her legs screamed. Her whole left side screamed. The wind hit her face like a punishment. She moved southeast. She counted steps the way she had counted arm pulls in the ravine. Not because the counting helped her move faster, but because it kept her mind on the present, and the present was manageable. The present was 1 step. 1 step, and then another step, and then another step, each one bought with what she had left, and each one putting Hale's radio click a little further behind her. She did not let herself think about how cold it was. She thought about the targeting coordinates. She thought about the strike window. She thought about the coalition soldiers who would be in their sleeping bags or at their equipment stations or eating their own joyless ration bars when the artillery came in, who had no idea that a specific piece of intelligence had been sitting inside a frozen ravine deciding whether to move. She thought about Okafor's eyes, steady and brown the night before the mission, when he had asked if she needed anything and she had said no. She wished she had said something different. Not because it would have changed anything, but because it was the last real human moment she could remember, and she wanted to have spent it better. The firebase lights were visible before she expected them to be. She stopped and dropped behind a drift and looked at the perimeter from a safe distance, her analytical mind already mapping what she could see against what she knew from the intelligence materials. Guard positions, patrol intervals, the gap at the northwestern corner where the drainage ditch ran under the fence line. She was cold. She was broken. She was alone. She was also, she realized, with something approaching dark satisfaction, exactly where she needed to be. Lieutenant Hale had declared her a field casualty and left her in the snow. He had not considered the possibility that the casualty had a different opinion about the matter. She studied the perimeter for 11 minutes, counting patrol passes, noting the timing, finding the rhythm of it, the way you find the rhythm of anything, if you are patient enough and still enough and committed enough to the outcome. Then Sergeant Kate Morrison, call sign Frost, adjusted her grip on her weapon, fixed her gaze on the northwestern drainage ditch, and began to move toward the lights. The drainage ditch was 18 inches wide and packed with ice that had been there long enough to develop layers of old ice underneath and new ice on top. And Kate went through the new layer twice before she found the way to distribute her weight across the surface without breaking it. She moved on her elbows and her right knee dragging the splinted leg behind her, and she did not think about the cold or the pain or the absurdity of what she was doing. She thought about the gap in the fence at the end of the ditch. She thought about the patrol interval she had clocked at 7 minutes and 40 seconds, which meant she had 4 minutes and 12 seconds from the last pass before the next one, and she had used 1 minute and 50 of those seconds getting into the ditch, which left her 2 minutes and 22 seconds to cover the remaining distance and be through the fence and into the dead ground on the other side before a Russian border soldier with a rifle and a flashlight came around the northwestern corner. She moved faster. The fence was chain link with a bottom section that had been bent upward by the drainage flow over what she estimated was several winters of freeze-thaw cycles. Not enough for a person to walk through. Enough for a person who had already decided that discomfort was not a valid reason to stop. She went through on her back, pulling herself by the fence post, the bottom wire catching her vest and then her pack, and then releasing both with a sound she felt rather than heard a vibration through the metal that lasted less than a second, but felt like a full minute while it was happening. She was inside. She pressed herself flat against the inner base of the fence and did not move and listened. Wind, her own breathing, the distant mechanical hum of a generator running somewhere inside the installation's main structure. A voicemail rush in mid-distance not alarmed a conversational exchange between two people who were bored and cold and had no idea what had just come through their perimeter. Kate waited until the voice moved away. Then she moved. The thing about Firebase Volkov that the intelligence materials had not fully conveyed was its size. She had been working from signals data and aerial imaging, and both of those tools created a kind of flat abstraction that did not prepare you for the actual and physical reality of moving through an installation that was larger than it had looked on paper. She had estimated 40 personnel. Walking through it and now reading the light patterns, the number of vehicle tracks in the snow, the configuration of the structures, she revised that estimate upward. 60, maybe 70. And somewhere in this installation on a clock she could feel ticking against her chest like a second heartbeat. A strike was being coordinated that would kill people who did not know they were about to die. She needed the communications center. In the intelligence materials, the communications architecture had been mapped to a central structure that the signals data characterized as high bandwidth, heavily encrypted, and continuously active. That meant it would have a power signature larger than the surrounding structures, which meant she needed to find the building with the most cable running into it and the steadiest generator sound. She moved along the inner wall of the perimeter, slow and controlled, letting the sounds of the installation build a map inside her head. A door opened 20 feet ahead of her. She went completely still. A soldier came out, lit a cigarette, turned his back to her, and stood there in the wind with the cigarette cupped in both hands, head down, the universal posture of a man who does not want to be where he is. Kate waited. She calculated the distance, the angle, the options. She did not want to make noise. Noise was a currency she could not spend inside a 60-person installation without consequences that would end the mission before it started. The soldier finished his cigarette in what felt like an architectural eternity and went back inside. Kate exhaled and moved. She found the communications building 11 minutes after breaching the fence. She knew at the moment she was close enough to feel it, not see it, feel it, the way certain structures have a density of activity that registers in the body before the eyes can process it. Multiple cable runs converging on a single roof point. A secondary generator running parallel to the main installation power. Light from a window that was not the yellow, warm light of a living space, but the blue-white of screens. She had found it. Getting inside was going to be the problem. She assessed the entry points from a position in the shadow between two equipment sheds, her back against a wall, her leg throbbing with the patient, relentless insistence of something that has been ignored too long. There was a primary door on the south face, too exposed, too trafficked. A soldier had gone in and come out twice in the time she had been watching. There was a secondary door on the east face that appeared to be a maintenance access, narrower, no visible traffic. There was a ventilation panel on the north face at approximately head height that had a single fastening screw on the visible corner that had not been tightened all the way. She looked at the ventilation panel for a long time. Then she looked at her leg. Then she looked at the ventilation panel again. "All right," she said to no one. Her own voice surprised her. She hadn't used it in hours, and it came out rougher than she expected, scraped down to something essential. She had not realized how much she had been talking to herself inside her head until she heard herself out loud and understood that she needed the sound. Not for comfort, for confirmation. She was still there, still thinking, Still deciding, she moved to the north face. Getting the panel open was a 4-minute operation conducted entirely in the dark with her left hand because her right hand was needed to keep her upright against the wall. The screw came out. The panel swung. The space beyond it was exactly wide enough for a person who had made a decision. She went in, head first, managing her weight distribution across her arms, pulling the splinted leg through last, and she did it without making a sound that was not completely swallowed by the generator noise from the adjacent unit. She dropped onto a concrete floor in a maintenance corridor that smelled of solder and machine oil in the particular institutional cold of a structure that is heated to function and not to comfort. She lay on the floor for 30 seconds. Just 30. She gave herself exactly 30 seconds of horizontal rest because her leg needed it and her mind needed to recalibrate from movement mode to observation mode. And then she was upright again, weight on the right, moving toward the sounds of the equipment. The communications center itself was separated from the maintenance corridor by a single interior door with a keypad lock. She looked at the keypad. She looked at the door frame. She looked at the gap at the bottom of the door and the light coming through it, and she knelt carefully and listened. 2 voices. One was doing most of the talking, rapid technical, a younger voice walking through timing data with the cadence of someone reciting a checklist. The other responded in short affirmations, older authoritative, the voice of someone who was not asking questions but approving answers. She could not see them, but she could map them from sound. Younger man left side of the room, probably at the primary workstation. Older voice center right, standing, not sitting, the kind of person who supervised rather than operated. She had one advantage and she needed to use it before it expired. They did not know she existed. She thought through the keypad. Standard military installation keypads in this class of structure used a 6-digit code with a 45-second lockout after 3 failed attempts. She did not have the code. She did have the installation's encryption documentation from the intelligence materials, which included a standardized initialization protocol that most field installations modified only partially from the factory default. Because field personnel under operational stress did not change things, they did not have to change. The factory default for this system's installation generation was a date format code. She looked at the keypad and she thought about what date would matter most to the people who had set up this installation, and she put in the date she had found embedded in the installation's founding signal signature, the date Firebase Volkov had gone operational. The keypad beeped once. The door unlocked. The younger man at the workstation turned first. He was faster than she expected. Early 20s sharp reflexes, and he came up out of his chair with a speed that told her he had real training, not just installation assignment. His hand went for the weapon on his hip, and she was already moving bad leg and all covering the distance between the door and the workstation in the time it took him to clear the holster, and she put the barrel of her sidearm against his forehead with enough force that the chair rolled back 2 inches. "Don't," she said. He froze. The older man, she could see him now, mid-50s, heavy through the shoulders, colonel's insignia on a uniform that had been worn long enough to carry the specific worn-in authority of a man who has held rank for a long time, did not reach for a weapon. He stood very still and looked at her with an expression she had not expected. Not fear, not anger, recognition, not of her specifically, of the situation, of what it meant that an American soldier in a damaged kit with a field-splinted leg had just walked into his communication center through a maintenance panel. He was reading the equation, and the equation was telling him something he did not like. "Sit down," she said to the younger one, and he sat, and she kept the weapon on him while she addressed the colonel. "I need you to step away from the console." The colonel did not move immediately. He looked at her leg, he looked at her face, he looked at the weapon, and then back at her face, and she saw him performing his own calculation. "You came through the fence," he said, in English, accented, but clear, deliberate, the English of someone who has studied it seriously, alone. "Step away from the console. There were 6 of you on the insertion route. Our intercept confirmed 6. She held his gaze. "There's 1 of me in this room. Step away from the console, or I will go through your technician to get to it, and that will be a waste." He stepped away. She moved to the console without taking her eyes fully off either of them, using the peripheral awareness that years of close-quarters work had built into her, reading their body language with the part of her brain that ran parallel to everything else. The younger one was scared and controllable. The colonel was thinking, and a thinking man in a situation like this was dangerous in a different register than a scared one. What she saw on the console made her chest tighten. The strike window had been moved. In the intelligence materials, she had read it as a 12-hour window centered on early morning, a standard artillery preparation timing designed to catch coalition forces during low alert overnight posture. But the display in front of her showed a compressed timeline. Someone had made a decision, and that decision had moved the window forward by nearly 4 hours. The strike was not hours away in the comfortable planning room sense. It was urgent, the kind of urgent that meant people were already in final preparation. "Who moved the window?" she said. The colonel said nothing. "The timeline was adjusted in the last 2 hours. I can see the timestamp." "Who authorized the change?" The younger technician made a sound, not words, but the involuntary throat clearing of someone who knows an answer and is deciding whether to be brave about not giving it. Kate looked at him. He looked at the colonel. The colonel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was the answer. "You moved it," she said to the colonel. "I command this installation." "Why did you move it forward?" He looked at her with something that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, and occupied the uncomfortable territory between them. "Because the window opened early. Conditions changed." "What conditions?" He smiled, and the smile was cold and precise, and told her that he was not going to answer that question voluntarily, and that he found her situation, despite its obvious tactical complication, for him somewhat amusing. "You have a broken leg," he said. "You are alone. You have perhaps 20 minutes before my security rotation discovers you are here, and you think you are going to stop something." "I already have," she said. "I'm at your console." She turned to the equipment and started working. The encryption keys she carried were not master keys. They were intercept tools designed to allow signal reading rather than signal sending. But signal architecture at this level had something that field security planners always underestimated: internal communication pathways that operated on slightly different encryption than external transmission, because internal traffic was considered lower risk. She had read that vulnerability in the installation signals data 3 days ago and had flagged it in her personal notes as an interesting structural weakness. She had not expected to be using it while standing on a broken leg in the middle of the installation it applied to. She routed through the internal pathway. The coalition emergency channel was 3 steps removed through the internal architecture, but 3 steps in a connected system was not 3 walls. It was 3 doors, and she had the tools to open them. Her hands moved across the unfamiliar keyboard with the concentrated precision of someone who has trained for exactly this configuration and is not going to let unfamiliarity become an obstacle. The colonel watched her work. "You are not going to reach them in time," he said. His voice had changed. Some of the amusement was gone, replaced by something she recognized as the beginning of concern, the emotion of a man who has run a calculation and found that the result is less certain than he expected. "You don't know how fast I work," she said, and she did not look up. The younger technician shifted in his chair. Kate's peripheral awareness caught it, and she said without looking at him, "If you move again, I will need to take that as a hostile act, and I will respond to it as a hostile act. Nod if you understand me." He nodded. "Thank you," she said, and meant it, and returned to the keyboard. She broke into the internal channel in 11 minutes. She had trained for 8, but the keyboard was non-standard, and she had a broken leg, and 11 minutes was a result she was willing to accept. The coalition emergency frequency opened under her hands like a door she had always known was there. She keyed the transmit. "This is Sergeant Kate Morrison, U.S. Military, call sign Frost, operating inside Firebase Volkov. Authentication follows." She read her authentication code, the one she had memorized in that forward operating base briefing room, which felt like it belonged to a different chapter of her life. Firebase Volkov is running an artillery strike on coalition forward positions. Strike window has been moved forward. Coordinates follow. She read the coordinates from the display in front of her. She read the timing data. She read everything she could see on that screen in the time she had available, transmitting it in compressed bursts the way she had been trained, keeping the transmission windows short enough to prevent easy triangulation while still putting the data through. Then she heard the colonel move. She turned in time to see him covering the distance between himself and the interior alarm panel on the wall, and she made a decision in the fraction of a second available. She could shoot him, which would solve one problem and create several louder ones, or she could not shoot him. She chose the third option that only existed because she was already moving, covering the distance to the alarm panel at the same speed he was arriving at it with her arm across his, in the moment his hand was reaching for the switch. And what followed was not a tactical engagement, but something more basics, two people fighting over a switch on a wall, one with a sidearm and one with rank insignia and 40 pounds and a functional set of legs on his side of the equation. He was stronger than she expected. She used that. She let him win the arm fight, let his momentum carry him forward, and used the brief half-second of his forward weight transfer to drop her hip and redirect that momentum sideways, the way a smaller person always has to fight a larger one, not by matching force, but by redirecting it. He went into the wall beside the panel rather than through it shoulder first, and the sound it made was significant. The young technician stood up. "Sit down," Kate said, and her voice had gone very quiet, the register that comes when there is no more space for volume, only clarity. He sat down. The colonel straightened, turned, and looked at her with the look of a man who has just updated his assessment. "You are more dangerous than I thought," he said. "People keep underestimating me today," she said. "I am starting to find it useful." She backed to the console and kept the weapon on both of them and used her free hand to complete the transmission sequence. Final confirmation. She received a brief encoded acknowledgement that told her someone on the other end had received the data and understood it. She did not know who. She did not need to know who. She needed to know that the information had left this room and entered the hands of people who could act on it. It had. She took a breath, and then she heard the alarm. Not the wall panel alarm that she had prevented. Something else. An outer perimeter signal, a different tone coming from somewhere in the installation that was not this room. Her mind processed it before her emotions could respond. Perimeter breach detected, northern section. Probably the drainage ditch, probably the fence gap. She had come through a delayed detection that the installation's security system had finally registered from her entry and had now escalated to active alert status. The colonel heard it too. His expression changed again, and this time what replaced the calculation was something closer to relief. And she understood immediately that the relief was not about him. It was about time. He was calculating the same thing she was. How long before the security response reached this building? Not long enough. She looked at the console. She looked at the door. She looked at the colonel and the young technician, and the window that was too small, and the maintenance corridor behind her, and the broken leg that had carried her 2 kilometers through a blizzard, and through a fence, and through a keypad, and through a physical confrontation with a man who outweighed her by 40 pounds. She looked at the strike timer on the console. She had transmitted the warning. That was done. That was irreversible. Whatever happened to her in the next 10 minutes, that data was in coalition hands, and the people who needed to act on it had it. But the strike timer was still counting, and she was still at the console. She turned back to the keyboard and started the next thing. The colonel watched her, and she could feel his uncertainty about what she was doing, his recognition that she was not stopping, and she heard him draw a breath that was almost admiring. "What are you doing now?" he said. "My job," she said. Her fingers moved across the keys. The installation's internal network was open to her through the pathway she had already broken. She had the architecture. She had the encryption. She had the time, not much of it, but enough for someone who was not going to waste a single second of what she had left. She started dismantling the targeting sequence from the inside. Not destroying it, she did not have the access level for full deletion. But introducing errors into a targeting system did not require deletion. It required precision in a different direction. A timing offset of 11 seconds in an artillery strike coordination sequence was not a delay that human operators could correct in real time. It was a cascade failure, one wrong number propagating through the sequence and pulling the integrity of the entire fire solution apart. She had read the architecture. She knew exactly where the number went. She put it in. The colonel took a step toward her. "Stop," she said, and the word came out with a weight that stopped him. He stopped. She completed the sequence. The strike timer reached its window, and the fire command propagated through the network with her 11-second offset embedded in it like a splinter, invisible until the moment it mattered, and the artillery sequence that Firebase Volkov had been building for weeks went out into the coordination network as something fractionally, critically, irrecoverably wrong. Outside, she heard boots on hard ground. Many boots, moving fast, moving toward her. She straightened up from the console and looked at the colonel. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on an enemy's face before. Not rage, not defeat, something more complicated than both. "Who are you?" he said. She picked up her weapon from where she had set it on the console edge. "Sergeant Kate Morrison," she said, "United States Army." She moved to the maintenance quarter door, and the colonel's voice came after her, not shouting, not alarmed, still in that same measured register of a man who processes things fully, even when the things he is processing are unwelcome. "You transmitted. They will respond. This installation will be—" "I know," she said. She opened the maintenance door and went through it and pulled it shut behind her and moved through the maintenance quarter as fast as her leg would carry her, which was faster than she had moved in the previous 4 hours because something had shifted in the economy of her body's resources. And she understood now that she was spending the reserves, the last of what she had, and it needed to last exactly long enough and not 1 minute more. The ventilation panel was ahead of her. The boots were outside and getting louder. She went through the panel the way that she had come in, head first, managing the drop, pulling the broken leg through, and this time the leg caught the edge of the panel housing. And the pain that hit her was a different order of magnitude from anything she had felt since the ravine. A white, bright, full-body overload that lasted exactly 2 seconds, and then receded to the deep, familiar burn she had been carrying all night. She lay on the frozen ground outside the communications building and breathed. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The boots were very close now. She could hear voices, not alarmed individual voices, but the organized, controlled noise of a security response team operating on a protocol call, sweeping sections, coordinating positions. They were being methodical. Methodical was survivable. Panic was what killed you. She looked at the perimeter fence and calculated the distance. She looked at the drainage ditch and calculated the angle. She looked up at the sky, which had lightened from black to a deep, dark gray. That meant dawn was somewhere on the other side of the storm hours away, still but definitively coming. And she thought about the coalition forces who had received her transmission and were even now somewhere in the military coordination architecture, processing what she had sent them, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since the radio clicked at the northern saddle. Not safe, not relieved, but not alone. She got up. She moved toward the fence. She made it back through the drainage ditch on pure mechanics. There was no elegance left in it, no tactical precision, just the fundamental physics of a body that had decided it was not finished and was executing that decision 1 inch at a time. She went through the fence gap the same way she had come in on her back, pulling herself by the post. And this time the bottom wire caught her vest harder, and she had to work it free with fingers that had gone past cold into something closer to wooden, the kind of cold where the hands still function, but the feedback is delayed, where you feel things half a second after they happen. She cleared the fence and rolled into the drainage channel and pressed herself flat and listened. The security sweep inside the installation was organized and getting more organized. She could hear the team leaders calling sections, not in panic, but in the clipped, efficient shorthand of people who have drilled this scenario and are now executing it, which told her 2 things simultaneously: that they had not yet located the specific breach point, and that they would locate it within minutes because organized sweeps of a perimeter this size at this personnel level covered ground fast. She had maybe 4 minutes before they found the fence gap. She used them. Moving southeast from the perimeter, staying in the dead ground, she put distance between herself and the fence line in the only way available to her, by going faster than her leg wanted to allow, and paying the cost of that immediately and without negotiation. The leg was communicating with increasing volume and decreasing patience the way a problem does when it has been tolerated past its own threshold, and she managed it the same way she managed all internal communication that was not operationally useful. She acknowledged it and continued. 300 meters from the fence, she found the terrain feature she had identified on her approach, a rock outcropping on the southern side of a shallow drainage rise that provided overhead cover from aerial observation and a clear sight line back toward the installation. She went to ground behind it, rolled onto her back, and looked up at the sky. The gray had deepened slightly. Maybe 4 hours to first light, maybe 3.5. She ran the numbers. The coalition acknowledgement she had received meant that someone had the data. But acknowledgement was not action between receiving intelligence and deploying a response. There was a chain of authorization that moved at its own speed, and that speed depended entirely on who was in the command seat and how quickly they could be convinced that a transmission from an authentication code belonging to a soldier who had been declared a field casualty was worth treating as live intelligence rather than a systems anomaly, or worse, an enemy deception operation. That was the problem she had not let herself think about while she was at the console. She thought about it now. Hale had declared her killed in action. That meant her authentication code was at minimum flagged as inactive and possibly quarantined as a potential compromise. The people who had received her transmission were looking at data from a dead woman's credentials and deciding what to do about it, and every minute of that decision was a minute during which the targeting sequence she had corrupted was being examined by Firebase Volkov's technical personnel, who would find the offset because they were competent and would correct it because that was their job. She had bought time. She did not know how much. She sat up and pulled out her radio and ran the same short signal test she had run in the ravine. The radio was still functional. The transmission had taken a toll on the battery. She was at 63%, which was enough for sustained operation, but not indefinitely, and she needed to be selective about what she used it for and when. She needed a direct line to someone who would act on what she knew, rather than process it through a chain that had already written her off. She thought about who that person was. She thought for a long time, lying against the cold rock with the wind cutting across her and her leg making its ongoing argument. And the answer she arrived at was one she did not entirely want to accept, because it required admitting something about herself that she had been carefully not admitting since the moment Hale's radio clicked. She was not operating as part of a team anymore. She was not a subordinate element in a mission structure with a chain above her that she could report to and defer to. She was the mission. Every decision, every communication, every tactical choice from this point forward had no buffer between it and the consequence. That was terrifying in the way that only very specific kinds of exposure are terrifying, not the sharp fear of immediate danger, which she had been managing for hours, but the sustained, quiet terror of complete accountability. She had been trained for it. She had not expected to use that training here tonight like this. She keyed the radio to a secondary frequency, not the coalition emergency channel she had used from the console, but a narrower band that was used for direct unit communication in environments where broader transmission risked interception. It was a frequency that Okafor used when he didn't want to go through the official net. She had memorized it the way she memorized all information she might need automatically, without deciding to, because her mind did not discriminate between what would be useful and what wouldn't until usefulness was proven. Okafor, she said. Okafor, this is Frost, respond. Static. She gave it 30 seconds and tried again. Okafor, I know this frequency. I know you carry a backup radio on this band because I watched you test it 3 nights ago at the FO Baum. If you are at or near your exfil point, respond. Static for 20 seconds, then so close to silence that she almost missed it, a voice. Frost. Just that, one word, and in it she heard everything, the shock, the recalibration, the particular quality of a person hearing something they had accepted as gone, suddenly speak into their ear. I'm alive, she said. I'm outside the perimeter of Firebase Volkov. I need you to hear me, and I need you to act on what I'm about to tell you because I don't have time for you to process it. A pause, then, Kate, we left you. I know what you did. I need you to listen. Another pause, shorter this time. I'm listening, she told him. Fast and complete, the way she briefed, no preamble, no emotional framing, just data and sequence. The strike timeline, the targeting coordinates, the transmission she had sent from the console, the offset she had embedded in the fire sequence, the fact that the installation's technical personnel were going to find that offset and correct it, and that the correction window was unknown but not infinite, the fact that her authentication code was flagged inactive and the coalition command receiving her transmission might treat it as a deception. When she finished, there was silence on the line for 4 seconds. You went inside, Okafor said. Okafor. You went inside Volkov, alone with a broken leg. I need you to get word to command that the transmission is real. You are the verification. You can confirm my authentication and confirm I was alive after the contact at the saddle. That makes the transmission credible instead of a question mark. Can you do that? Hale filed you as KIA Kate. I know what Hale filed. Can you do what I'm asking? The pause this time had a different quality. She could hear him thinking, not hesitating, There was a difference, and she knew the sound of both from years of working next to him. Hesitation was fear. Thinking was architecture. He was building something. "We're 40 minutes from the primary exfil," he said finally. "Davis is carrying 10-10, took a round through the shoulder at the saddle. He's mobile but slow. Reyes is on point. Hale is..." Shh. He stopped. "Hale is what?" "Hale is running the extraction. Kate, I need to tell you something." "Tell me fast." "The route we were given, the one that put us through the northern saddle, Hale chose it from 2 options. Command gave him 2 options, and he chose the one that went through the saddle." She lay against the rock and felt the cold come up through her back, and she said nothing for a moment because the thing she was feeling required a moment before she could put words around it without the words being wrong. "He chose it specifically," she said. "I don't know specifically. I know he chose it, and I know the saddle was where the reception was waiting." "When did you know this?" "I didn't know it. I started thinking about it after we left you. I've been thinking about it for the last 3 hours." She closed her eyes. The wind moved across her face. Behind her eyelids, she saw Hale's face in the briefing room, pointing to the map, smooth and confident, the route laid out like it had always been obvious. She heard his voice on the radio. "I am declaring you a field casualty, Morrison. I am sorry." The formality of it, the speed of it. 4 seconds. "Okafor, listen to me carefully. I need you to separate from Hale before you reach the exfil point. I need you to reach command directly and give them my authentication. Override, you have secondary authority to verify my credentials. You were my team partner on the last 2 rotations. That's on record. Tell them the transmission is real. Tell them everything I just told you. If I separate from Hale, he's going to know something is wrong. Something is wrong." Silence. "Yeah," Okafor said quietly. "Yeah, it is. Can you do it?" "Kate," his voice had dropped to something very low. "I should have gone back for you." The admission landed with a weight she was not entirely prepared for. Not because it surprised her. She had known, in the part of her that tracked people accurately, that Okafor had not agreed with the decision the way Hale had made it. But hearing it said directly without decoration was something else. It was the kind of honesty that cost something. "You're going back for me now," she said. "Get to command, Opo." "Copy," he said, "and then stay alive." "Working on it." She closed the channel and lay still for a moment and let the conversation move through her and settle, because there was information in it that changed the shape of what she was doing, and she needed the new shape to be clear before she moved again. If Hale had deliberately chosen the compromise route, then the ambush had not been a failure of intelligence. It had been a feature of it. Someone inside the command structure had routed a team through a prepared enemy position and then left the one person who had the communications expertise and the encryption keys to either die in a ravine or be captured inside enemy territory. Both outcomes served the same purpose, removing her from the equation before she could fully understand what the signals data was telling her. She thought about what the signals data had actually told her. Not just the strike timeline. She had been focused on that because it was the most immediate, the most actionable. But the data had contained something else, something she had flagged and set aside while she dealt with the console. The network architecture she had seen on that screen was not the architecture of a single installation running an independent operation. It was a node, one relay point in a network that was larger and older and more embedded than a field strike operation had any reason to be. Firebase Volkov was not the origin, it was the delivery mechanism. She sat up and looked toward the installation. The security sweep was still active. She could see the light movement through the perimeter, multiple flashlight beams crossing and recrossing, organized and thorough. They had found the fence gap by now. They were triangulating her approach path, which meant they were building an exit path estimate, which meant they were deploying personnel along the most probable routes out of the area. She was in the least probable place right now, stationary and dead ground between the installation and the direction any sensible person would run. The search was moving outward. She was in the space it had already passed through. She had bought herself time by not running. But the installation itself was changing. She could feel it in the noise level, the movement patterns, the way the generator sound had shifted, slightly different load, different demand. Something inside Firebase Volkov was spinning up. She needed to understand what. She pulled up the intelligence of materials on her navigation unit and looked at the installation schematic with the new information she had gathered from the console. The armory was on the eastern perimeter. The fuel storage was central north. The primary vehicle bay was western. And the artillery positioning that the mission had originally come to document was, she stopped. The artillery was not where the schematic said it was. She had walked through enough of the installation to know this from direct observation. The positioning on her materials put the artillery platform at the southwestern section of the base. But the generator load distribution she had observed, the cable routing, the vehicle track, concentration she had seen on the ground, all of it pointed northeast. The artillery had been moved. Recently. The schematic was outdated, which meant the intelligence materials she had been given at the briefing were based on older observation data, which meant the targeting coordinates she had transmitted from the console were based on the artillery's original position. She felt the floor drop out from under the plan she had been building. The coalition response, if it came, would be directed at where the artillery had been, not where it was. The strike she had tried to prevent was not stopped. She had introduced a timing offset into a fire sequence pointed at a platform that was no longer at the coordinates she had read from the display. The display had been showing old positioning data that the installation's own outdated records had not corrected. And this thought arrived with the specific chill of something that has been waiting to be seen. The display had been showing her what they wanted her to transmit. She went very still. The console had been accessible. The keypad code had worked. The internal network pathway had been open. She had gotten into the communications center of an enemy military installation through a bent fence, a ventilation panel, and a factory default keypad code that field personnel had allegedly never bothered to change. She was good. She knew exactly how good she was, and she was not that good. The question was not whether she had been allowed in. The question was what she had been allowed in to do and who had made that calculation, and whether the data she had transmitted was accurate intelligence or shaped intelligence. And at what point in the chain between Firebase Volkov and Coalition Command it was going to matter that she could not answer that question with certainty. She keyed her radio. Okafor, new information. Are you still on? 3 seconds. Still on. Haven't separated yet, waiting for terrain cover. The artillery coordinates I transmitted, I need you to add a flag when you relay to command. The coordinates were from installation records that may be outdated. The actual platform may have been repositioned northeast of the documented location. I cannot confirm the positioning without visual on the platform itself. A pause. Kate, you need to go back in. I know. With the whole base on alert. I know. To confirm the artillery position. And to finish what I started on that targeting sequence. The offset I put in was based on coordinates that may be wrong. If the platform has moved, the offset calculation needs to be redone. That is, he stopped. She heard him almost say something and pull it back, and she appreciated the restraint because the thing he had almost said was accurate and she did not need it said out loud. Get to command, she said. Flag the coordinates. Verify my authentication. I'll handle the rest. Kate, his voice had gone very quiet again. If you go back in there, Okafor. Yeah. Tell Tan I said to stop complaining about the shoulder. He complained about his knee for 2 weeks after Fallujah, and it turned out to be a bruise. A sound came through the radio that might have been a laugh, brief and genuine, and then, I'll tell him, go. She closed the channel and looked at the installation. The security sweep was beginning to retract, pulling personnel back toward the perimeter from the outer search pattern, which meant they were consolidating rather than expanding, which meant they had not found a trail that led them confidently outward. They were pulling back to defend the installation rather than pursue. That was a command decision, and it was the command decision she would have made in the colonel's position. And the fact that she would have made it meant she understood its logic, and the logic had a gap in it. The gap was that a defender pulling inward leaves the space between the inner perimeter and the outer search zone empty. She was in that space. She started moving. Going back through the fence was worse than the first time, not because the gap had changed, but because her body had. The reserves she had spent getting out had not replenished in the 30 minutes she had been stationary cold, did not restore resources the way rest did in normal conditions. And these were not normal conditions. She went through on her back and the wire caught her in the same place, and she worked it free with the same wooden fingers and came through into the drainage ditch and lay there breathing for 15 seconds. 15 seconds. That was all she allowed. The maintenance corridor entrance was exactly where she had left it, panel slightly ajar, the interior dark. She went back in the same way headfirst, managing the drop the broken leg last. This time the drop was harder because her arms were giving her the preliminary signals of exhaustion, the early warning system that told her she was approaching the boundary of what muscle and will could sustain without structural consequences. She was aware of this, and she continued anyway. Inside the maintenance corridor, she moved toward the communications center door. The keypad was still on the same code. She had not changed it, which was either lucky or another aspect of the setup. And she made a deliberate choice not to decide which, because that question led to a spiral that would cost her focus she could not spare. She entered the code. The door opened. The room was empty. The colonel and the young technician were gone. Of course they were. She had been outside for 30 minutes, and the installation was on full alert, and leaving 2 personnel unsecured in a room that had just been breached was not a decision a competent commander made. The colonel had taken his technician and moved them to a more defensible position, which also meant that whatever they knew about her intrusion was now distributed through the installation's command structure. She moved to the console. The targeting sequence was on the screen. She looked at it with new eyes, the eyes of someone who had spent 30 minutes reconsidering everything she had seen the first time. She looked at the coordinate data. She looked at the positioning records. She looked at the timestamp on the last position update, 4 months ago. The artillery platform position had not been updated in the system in 4 months. In a professionally run installation that was not an oversight, that was a policy, someone had decided that the system records would not reflect current platform positioning, which was either a security measure to protect operational data from exactly the kind of intrusion she had just committed, or it was a trap layer, a deliberate misdirection built into the accessible data. She pulled up the installation's internal sensor network, the same pathway she had used before. The sensor net included perimeter cameras, environmental monitors, and movement sensors throughout the installation. She was not supposed to have access to the movement sensors through this pathway. But the pathway was open, and the movement sensor data was on the same internal network. And what the movement sensors told her in the form of heat signatures and pressure readings across the installation's flooring was that the northeastern section of the base had the highest current activity level of any section. Personnel were concentrated there. Equipment was being operated. The generator load on the northeastern circuit was the highest in the installation. That was where the artillery was. She confirmed it 3 ways using 3 different data streams available through the internal sensor network, and then she sat back and understood what she was looking at. The northeastern artillery position changed the geometry of the strike target, not by a massive margin, perhaps 400 meters of offset from the original coordinates, but 400 meters was the difference between a strike hitting the edge of a coalition position and hitting the center of it. The original coordinates had been slightly off. The corrected coordinates were precise. She reran her offset calculation with the correct positioning data. The number changed. She plugged the new offset into the targeting sequence with the steadiness of someone who has passed through fear into the country on the other side of it, where there is nothing left but the work, and the work is all there is. She embedded it deep in the coordination timing, not at the surface level, where the first technician who looked at it would find it, but in the synchronization layer, the handshake between the primary and secondary fire control systems, the place where an 11-second error would propagate forward through every subsequent calculation like a crack moving through ice. When she finished, she straightened up. Behind her, the door opened. She turned. The colonel was standing in the doorway. He was alone. He had a sidearm in his hand, and it was pointed at her, and on his face was an expression that had finally resolved into something singular. Not calculation, not assessment, not the complicated mixture of reactions he had shown her before. Just a man who has reached the end of his own patience, looking at the thing that has exhausted it. "Step away from the console," he said. She did not move. He looked at the screen behind her. She watched his eyes read it. She watched him understand what she had done. "You came back," he said. It was not a question. It was not even surprise. It was the acknowledgement of a man processing a data point that his model had not predicted. "I had unfinished work," she said. He looked at the sidearm in his hand and then at her, and something moved across his face that was not admiration and was not contempt, and sat in a territory between them that she did not have a word for. "The offset you put in," he said. "The first one. You already knew it was based on outdated coordinates." I suspected it when I left. I confirmed it when I came back. And you corrected it? Yes. He looked at the screen again. She watched him run the calculation, not the tactical one, not the strategic one, but the personal one, the one that a man runs when he is holding a weapon and looking at someone who has done something he did not believe possible and is deciding what that means for what he does next. My technicians will find it, he said. They found the first one. It took them 22 minutes. Yes. The second one is in a different layer. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the installation, sounds had changed again. The security response reorganizing personnel moving in new patterns, the base adapting to the intrusion, the way an organism adapts to something it cannot identify clearly enough to address directly. How long have you been in the field? He said. The question was so unexpected that she answered it honestly before she processed why he was asking. 9 years. And they left you in a ravine? Yes. He lowered the sidearm. Not fully, he kept it in his hand at his side, the way a person holds something they are not ready to put down, but are not ready to use. She read this and did not move, because movement would resolve the ambiguity in a direction she could not predict. The network I am connected to, he said carefully, like each word was a door he was choosing to open, is not limited to this installation. She kept her eyes on him. I know. You know. I saw the architecture on the console. This is a node. He nodded once slowly. If coalition forces respond to your transmission, he said they will address this installation. They will not address the network. That's why I'm still at the console, she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said something she would think about for years afterward, said it in the quiet, deliberate voice of a man who has arrived at a decision through a path he did not expect to travel. What do you need? The installation shuddered, not from an explosion, from the sound of something very large beginning to move in the northeastern section, mechanical and purposeful. And both of them heard it at the same moment, and both of them understood what it meant. The artillery was being repositioned. Someone had given the order to fire early. The mechanical shutter moved through the floor and up through Kate's boots and into her broken leg, and she felt it as both vibration and information, simultaneously, the way a person who has been paying close enough attention to a situation long enough starts to feel data, rather than just receive it. The artillery was moving, not repositioning for calibration. Moving with purpose, with speed, with the specific mechanical urgency of a system that has received a fire order and is executing it. She knew the difference because she had spent 2 weeks at a fire control school in her 3rd year of service, and the sound of a howitzer traversing under live fire command was different from every other sound that piece of equipment made. It was the sound of something that had been waiting, becoming something that was happening. She turned back to the console. The colonel was still in the doorway, sidearm at his side, and the question he had asked her, "What do you need?" was still in the air between them, still real, and she made a decision about it in the time it took her to cross to the keyboard, which was approximately 2 seconds. I need you to call your technical personnel off the fire sequence, she said, not looking at him, already working. Not permanently. Long enough. Long enough for what? For the offset I embedded to propagate through the synchronization layer before your people find it and pull it out. Once it propagates, it cannot be corrected without a full system reset, and a full system reset takes your artillery merely offline for a minimum of 40 minutes. She heard him breathe. Just once, deliberate. If I interfere with that order, he said, there are people above me who will... Colonel? She looked at him over her shoulder. I know this is a node. I know you are not the top of this network. I know whoever gave the early fire order did not give it from this installation. And I know that the question of what happens to you after tonight is something you have probably already started calculating. She held his gaze. Call your people off the sequence for 8 minutes. That is all I am asking. He was quiet for 4 seconds. She counted them. Then he raised his radio and spoke into it in Russian, short and commanding, and she caught enough of it. She was not fluent, but she was functional in the operational vocabulary to understand that he had told his technical team to stand by on the fire sequence, pending his direct authorization. Not a cancellation, a hold, 8 minutes. She worked. The synchronization layer was deeper than the surface targeting data, and accessed through a different pathway within the installation's internal network, one that required her to wrote through the environmental monitoring system as a stepping stone, an inelegant solution that she would not have chosen under any other circumstance. But that was available and functional, and functional was all that mattered right now. She had done this type of forced pathway routing before, once in a training exercise, and she had been told at the time that in a real operational environment with live encryption and active countermeasures, it would take 3 times as long as it had in the exercise. She did it in slightly under double the exercise time. The offset propagated at 4 minutes and 51 seconds. She sat back from the console and let out a breath that she had not been fully aware she was holding. "It's done," she said. The colonel looked at the screen. He crossed to it. She stepped aside and let him, because the weapon at his side had remained at his side, and she was reading that as a statement of intent that she was choosing to honor. And he looked at what she had done with the eyes of a man who understood systems well enough to recognize when one had been fundamentally altered. "My people will still find it," he said, "in 40 minutes or more. And in 40 minutes, this installation will look very different than it does right now." He looked at her. "You are expecting a response to your transmission. I am expecting coalition air power, yes. And you are inside the installation when that happens. That has been a feature of the situation for the last several hours," she said. "I have been managing it." Something crossed his face that was almost in different circumstances. Something she might have called humor. Not warmth, the man was not warm, and she would not have trusted him if he had been. But a recognition of absurdity that was genuine, and genuine reactions were the only ones worth reading. "Why did they leave you?" he said. The question came without preamble, without softening, and it landed the way direct questions always land, harder than you expect in a place you did not know was undefended. She looked at him steadily. "I don't know the full answer to that yet, but you have a theory." "I have several. And the one you believe most." She thought about Okafor's voice on the radio. The route that Hale had chosen from 2 options. The reception committee at the Northern Saddle, the specific skill set that had made her valuable on this mission, and that had also, she now understood, made her dangerous to whoever had arranged the compromise. "I think someone needed me out of the picture before I finished reading what the signals data was telling me," she said. "And I think the person who made that decision is not in this installation." The colonel nodded, slow and deliberate. "No," he said, "he is not." The weight of those 4 words fell into the room and settled. She looked at him. "You know who it is?" He did not answer immediately. He moved to a chair and sat in it, and the movement had a quality of something being laid down, not surrender, but a burden being set on a surface that could hold it. He looked older than he had when she first came through that door. Not weaker, just more visible. "I have been running this installation for 14 months, he said. "In that time, I have received operational orders through 4 different communication channels from 3 different command sources. That is not normal architecture. That is the architecture of a network that does not want its nodes to be able to map it fully." He paused. "I have been a soldier for 31 years. I know what legitimate command structure looks like. This is not it." Kate absorbed this and kept her face neutral, because showing what she was feeling would cost her the clarity she needed to process what he was telling her. "The early fire order," she said. "Which channel did it come through?" "The 4th one, the channel I cannot trace above a certain relay point." "The same channel that gave you our insertion route." He looked at her sharply, not surprise recognition. "You confirm that?" "I have a strong inference." He was quiet. Outside, the installation's alert sounds continued their organized rhythm, but something had shifted in them. The frantic quality of the initial response had stabilized into something more sustained, more watchful, which told her the security sweep had concluded without finding her, and the installation was now in a waiting posture. Waiting for what specifically was the question that the people inside the perimeter were probably asking themselves, and the answer to it was currently sitting in a coalition command post somewhere being evaluated by people who were deciding whether a transmission from a dead woman's authentication code was worth mobilizing assets over. She checked the time. 41 minutes since she had transmitted from the console the first time. If Okafor had separated from Hale and reached command with her verification, the authorization chain for a response would be somewhere between initiated and completed. If he hadn't, if Hale had seen what Okafor was doing and intervened, or if command had treated the verification as insufficient, Then the timeline she was working against was longer, and she needed to extend the offset window. She needed to know which situation she was in. She keyed her radio short burst. Okafor, status. 6 seconds of static, then frost. Command has the verification. They are processing. There is a complication. What complication? Hail, Okafor said, and in the single word she heard the full weight of it. He was on the command channel when I relayed. He contested the authentication. He is telling them the transmission is a deception operation, that your credentials were compromised when you went down at the saddle. Kate closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Who is the duty officer? She said, Colonel Hargrove. She opened her eyes. Hargrove. She had met Hargrove at a joint planning session 8 months ago briefly across a table covered in maps. He had asked 3 questions during the session, and all 3 had been exactly the right questions, which was the kind of thing she noticed and remembered. She did not know him, but she knew he was the kind of officer who asked the right questions. Okafor, relay this directly to Hargrove. Tell him to pull the signal architecture on the transmission I sent. The routing pathway will show it originated inside Volkov's internal network, not from an external source. A deception operation would not route through the installation's own internal system. The pathway is the verification. A pause. That's right. Give me 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes, she said and meant it literally. She turned to the colonel. How many technical personnel can reach the fire sequence in the next 10 minutes? He thought about this with the seriousness of a man who has decided to answer honestly. 3, my primary technician who is currently at the artillery platform, and 2 support personnel who have access to his credentials. Is there a way to route them away from the platform without triggering a secondary alert? He looked at her with an expression that said he understood exactly what she was asking and was weighing it in real time. I could call a systems check on the perimeter sensor array. It would require all technical personnel to verify readings at the sensor stations. It would take approximately 12 minutes, and it would be a legitimate order that no one would question. Do it. He raised his radio again and spoke, and again she caught enough to confirm that he had given the order cleanly without any embedded signal that she could detect. And she made a calculated choice to believe that the order was as clean as it sounded, because she did not have the resources to verify it, and acting on incomplete information was better than not acting. Her radio crackled. Okafor's voice, and behind it, fainter but unmistakable, a second voice she did not recognize, but whose register and authority she read immediately as command level. Sergeant Morrison, Hargrove's voice. I have your routing verification. Transmission confirmed as internally sourced. Authentication is valid. She felt something release in her chest that she had not known was locked. Sir, she said, the artillery platform has been repositioned. My original coordinates are offset by approximately 400 meters northeast of the documented position. I have a corrected offset embedded in the fire sequence synchronization layer, but I cannot guarantee its integrity beyond the next 30 to 40 minutes. I need a response window that accounts for that timeline. A pause on Hargrove's end. She heard the sound of a command post in the background, multiple voices equipment, the organized noise of a structure, doing several things simultaneously. Morrison, Hargrove said, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it directly. Sir, are you inside Firebase Volkov right now? Yes, sir. The pause this time had a different quality. How did you get in? Through the drainage ditch on the northwestern perimeter, sir. Ventilation panel on the communications building, north face. Another pause. You're inside their communications center. Yes, sir. With a broken leg. Yes, sir. The sound from the command post behind him changed slightly, and she thought she heard very distantly. Someone laughed, not cruelly, but with a specific startled quality of someone receiving information that has exceeded their model of what was possible. Morrison Hargrove said, I am initiating a response. I need you to get out of that installation. Sir, I need 5 more minutes at the console. Morrison, 5 minutes. The network architecture visible from this console contains relay data that identifies at least 2 additional nodes in a coordinated intelligence network. If I leave now, that data stays inside this system. If I have 5 minutes, I can extract it and transmit it before the response hits. A long pause, the longest one yet. 4 minutes, Hargrove said, then you move. That is not a suggestion. Copy, sir, 4 minutes. She went back to the console. The colonel watched her and did not speak, and she worked with the concentrated silence of someone who has been given a time limit and has made it the only thing that exists. The network relay data was embedded in the communications architecture at a level below the operational data, not hidden exactly, but not indexed, the kind of data that exists in a system because it has to exist for the system to function, and that no one bothers to look at unless they know it's there. She pulled it with the extraction tool built into her encryption kit, and she was mildly surprised and then immediately not surprised to find that what she pulled was not the relay data of a 14-month-old installation running a single operation. It was 14 months of coordinated multi-node intelligence traffic. She looked at it for approximately 3 seconds, long enough to understand its scope, and then she initiated the transmission sequence without looking at it further, because looking at it further would cost time, and time was the one thing she was completely out of. The transmission took 90 seconds. She watched the progress indicator with the focused attention of someone watching the last of something irreplaceable move from one place to another, willing it to move faster through nothing more than the intensity of her attention, which she knew was not how data transmission worked and which she did not stop doing. It completed. She stepped back from the console. "It's done," she said. The colonel stood. He had been sitting in the chair this whole time watching her work, and when he stood, he moved with the deliberateness of a man who has made a decision and is organizing himself around it. He walked to a cabinet on the eastern wall, opened it, and took out a heavy coat that he set on the console between them without a word. She looked at the coat. She looked at him. "You will be outside shortly," he said. "It is cold." She did not fully understand what the gesture meant in the larger context of what he had done in the last 40 minutes and what it was going to cost him. She did not have time to understand it, but she picked up the coat because cold was cold and surviving the next hour was still a requirement. "The man who sent your insertion route through my installation's communication channel," she said. "The 4th channel." "Yes, you have a name." He looked at her with eyes that had the particular steadiness of a man who has been carrying something heavy long enough that he no longer notices the weight as a separate thing from himself. "I have a designation," he said, "a network identifier. I have never had a name." "Give me the identifier," he told her. She committed it to memory with the automatic total retention that 9 years of intelligence work had built into her. And then she moved to the maintenance corridor door because 4 minutes was 4 minutes, and Hargrove had not sounded like a man who offered extensions. "Colonel," she said at the door. He looked at her. "You should be a considerable distance from the northeastern section of this installation in the next few minutes." He nodded once. "I am aware." She went through the door. The maintenance corridor was as she had left it. She moved through it fast, the pain in her leg having crossed into a register that was almost abstract, the way very loud sounds eventually become a kind of silence. She reached the ventilation panel and went through head first and dropped onto the frozen ground outside, and the cold hit her like a wall. She ran into, rather than a temperature, she entered, and she pulled the colonel's coat around herself and moved. She needed distance from the northeastern section. She needed distance from the communications building. She needed distance from the fence line and from the perimeter sweep, and she needed it fast, and the fastest available direction was southeast, which was also the direction that led back toward the terrain, dead ground in the rock outcropping where she had sheltered before, and she moved toward it with every reserve she had left, counting steps, because counting was what kept the machine running when everything else was trying to stop it. At 112 steps, her radio crackled. "Okafor. Kate, get down." She dropped into the snow. The first strike hit Firebase Volkov's northeastern section at what her internal clock told her was roughly 30 seconds later, and the sound of it was not like the movies, not the clean, sharp boom of a controlled explosion, but something more fundamental, a percussion that she felt through the frozen ground before she heard it, a pressure change that moved through the air like a hand pushing against everything at once. Then the sound arrived, and it was enormous, and behind it came the secondary sounds of a structure coming apart in ways that structures are not designed to come apart: metal and concrete, and the materials of a military installation meeting a force they were not built to withstand. She kept her face in the snow. The second strike came 20 seconds after the first, and the third came 12 seconds after the second, and she counted the intervals with the mechanical patience of someone who understands that the thing she needs most right now is to stay exactly where she is and to make no decisions about moving until the decision has clear information to support it. The installation was burning. She could feel the heat differential on her left side, the side facing the installation even at this distance, even through the colonel's coat, a warmth that was completely wrong against the background cold of the blizzard, like standing next to something that should not be warm and finding that it is anyway. She did not raise her head. She waited. Her radio crackled again. Hargrove, this time direct. Morrison, confirm your position. Southeast of the perimeter, approximately 300 meters face down in the snow. Are you clear of the impact zone? I believe so, sir. Stay down. We have 2 more passes. Copy, sir. The 4th and 5th strikes came, and each one reorganized the sound and the heat and the pressure of the situation in ways she cataloged without being able to fully process, because processing would require a distance from the event that she did not have. She was inside it. She was 300 meters from a military installation being systematically destroyed by coalition air power in response to a transmission she had made from inside that installation. And the only reason she was not inside it when the strikes came was a 4-minute deadline from a colonel she had met 41 minutes ago over a table of maps. And one other reason. She thought about the drainage ditch, the ventilation panel, the keypad that had opened on the first try, the console that had been accessible, the network that had been open, the colonel who had lowered his weapon and asked her what she needed, the network identifier he had given her. She turned it over in her mind the way she would turn a physical object over in her hands, examining its surfaces, its weight, the way it connected to the other pieces of the picture. A designation, not a name. A network identifier that had been given to her by a Russian colonel inside a firebase that was currently being destroyed, passed across a room between 2 people who had been on opposite sides of every relevant line an hour before, and who had arrived through the specific mechanics of the night they had both been through at something she did not have a word for. Not alliance, not trust. Mutual recognition of a larger problem. The strike stopped. She raised her head. Firebase Volkov was burning in the way that things burn when they have been struck with precision and conviction, not randomly, not chaotically, but with the specific intensity of destruction that has been aimed rather than scattered. The northeastern section was the worst of it. The communications building was damaged but not destroyed, which was either intentional precision on the part of the strike planning or a margin of error that had happened to work in her favor, and she decided not to examine that question too closely. She got up. The getting up was the hardest physical act she had performed since climbing out of the ravine, because her body had finally begun the process of tallying what she owed it, adding up the hours and the cold and the broken leg and the climbs and the drops and the combat and the sprint across 300 meters of frozen ground, and presenting the bill with the impatient urgency of a creditor who has been patient long enough. She got up because the alternative was not getting up, and not getting up was the only choice she was not willing to make. She stood unsteady and looked at the burning installation, and she thought about Hale. She thought about his voice on the radio, the formality of it, the 4 seconds. She thought about the route he had chosen, the northern saddle, the reception committee. She thought about the network identifier in her memory and the 14 months of coordinated traffic she had just transmitted to Coalition Command, and the shape of the picture those 2 things made together. She thought about what it meant that the man who had left her to die in a ravine was currently on his way to a forward operating base to file a report that would describe her as killed in action and the mission as a partial failure. She thought about Hargrove and the 4-minute deadline and the response that had arrived at 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which was either a coincidence or a very specific form of professional communication from a colonel who kept his word to the second. She raised her radio. Okafor, I'm here. Where is Hale? A pause. He's at the exfil staging point. He's been on the command channel continuously. He's Kate. He's been telling command that the response was a mistake. He's telling them your transmission was enemy-sourced. Is command listening to him? Less than they were an hour ago. Okafor's voice had something in it that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief. Hargrove has the routing verification and the network relay data you sent. Hale knows that. He's been quiet for about 6 minutes. 6 minutes. She imagined the quality of that silence, the specific silence of a man who has been running a version of events and has just watched the version he is running collide with a version that has better evidence. Okafor, is Tan stable? He's complaining about the cold now instead of the shoulder. Reyes says that's a good sign. It is, she said. Tell him it's a good sign from me too. She started moving, not toward the installation, away from it southeast toward the terrain that led back to the exfil quarter, because she had done what she had come to do, and the machine that had carried her through the night was still running, still putting one foot in front of the other. And the thing that kept it running was not adrenaline, which had exhausted itself hours ago, and not anger, which she had spent carefully and deliberately in the places where it was most useful. It was something quieter and more durable. She had looked at a choice in a ravine and she had made it. Everything after that had been the consequence of that choice unfolding one step at a time, one decision at a time. Each one bought with what she had, and each one putting her further from the woman Hale had declared a field casualty, and closer to something she was still in the process of understanding. Behind her, Firebase Volkov burned against the dark sky, orange and specific, and the sound it made was the sound of something that had been prepared for a long time, coming apart in a short one. She moved southeast. She counted steps. At step 217, she saw headlights. Ground vehicles, two of them moving along the terrain track that ran parallel to the dead ground corridor, moving toward her position from the south. She stopped and read them, their speed, their spacing, their light configuration, and understood that they were not the vehicles she needed to worry about. Coalition markings on the light configuration, moving without tactical concealment, which meant they were not approaching a threat. They were looking for something specific. They were looking for her. She raised her arm. The lead vehicle stopped. A door opened and a figure came out and moved toward her through the snow. And even at this distance, even in this dark, she recognized the way he moved, the particular gait of someone who has spent years carrying more weight than the situation officially requires, steady and slightly forward-leaning, like a man always preparing to absorb the next thing. Okafor stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked at him. He was wearing the same kit he'd had on at the saddle, still carrying the backup radio. On the secondary frequency, still had his weapon in the same configuration she had memorized in 3 deployments of working next to him. He looked at her broken leg and the colonel's coat and whatever the hours had done to her face, and his expression went through several things quickly before it settled. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you," she said. He reached out and put one hand on her shoulder, and the contact lasted exactly long enough to be real and no longer the kind of contact that says everything it needs to say and knows when it's done. "Can you walk to the vehicle?" he said. "I walked 2 kilometers to a hostile fire base on this leg," she said. "I think I can manage 30 feet. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I thought so." He walked beside her, not holding her up. She did not ask him to, and he did not offer but present, matching her pace, which was slow and deliberate and entirely her own. Behind them in the darkness, Firebase Volkov continued to burn. And in the communications building that the strike had damaged but not destroyed on a console that was still technically operational, the synchronization layer of an artillery fire sequence continued to carry an 11-second offset that had been put there by a soldier who had been declared dead and had decided that was someone else's opinion. The vehicle was warm. That was the first thing Kate registered when Okafor helped her into the back seat. Not the seat itself, not the other personnel in the vehicle, not the sound of the radio traffic coming through the front console. The warmth. It hit her like a physical force, like something that had been owed to her for a very long time, finally arriving, and her body's response to it was immediate and involuntary. A shaking that started in her hands and moved inward. The deep, uncontrolled trembling of a system that has been operating at its absolute limit and has just received permission to acknowledge that fact. She did not fight it. Fighting it would cost energy she had already spent. She let herself shake, and she looked out the window at the burning installation receding behind them. And she thought about the network identifier the colonel had given her, still sitting in her memory where she had put it intact and waiting. Specialist Ewan was driving. She did not know Ewan. He was from the rescue element. Not Hale's team, but he drove the way she liked people to drive in a tactical situation, which was fast and deliberate without being reckless, like someone who understood that speed was a tool and not a statement. In the passenger seat, a medic named Cho had turned around and was looking at her leg with a professional assessment of someone who has seen a lot of field splints and is forming an opinion about this one. "How long?" Cho said. "Since the ambush," Kate said. 4, maybe 5 hours. Cho's expression did not change in any way that communicated panic, which Kate took as a positive indicator. You walked on this extensively for 5 hours, give or take. Cho looked at Okafor and then back at Kate and then back at the leg. I'm going to stabilize it properly and start a fluid line. It's going to hurt. Everything has been hurting, Kate said. You're not introducing a new experience. Cho almost smiled. Almost. Then he started working and he was right that it hurt. And Kate looked out the window and did not make a sound, because the discipline of not making a sound was one of the last forms of control available to her, and she was not ready to surrender it. Okafor sat beside her. He did not talk. She appreciated this more than she would have been able to articulate if he had asked her to, which he did not, because Okafor was one of those rare people who understood that silence was sometimes the most precise form of communication available. The forward operating base was 40 minutes out. She used the 40 minutes. Not to rest was not something her mind was capable of, yet too much still unresolved, too many moving parts still in motion. She used the time to organize what she knew into the structure it needed to be in when she delivered it, because she understood that the conversation waiting for her at the FOB was the most important conversation of everything that had happened tonight, possibly the most important conversation of her career, and it needed to be delivered with the precision and completeness of someone who had been paying full attention to everything and had not lost a single piece of it, despite the cold and the broken leg and the hours in the snow. She went through it sequentially. The ambush at the northern saddle, the route Hale had chosen from 2 options, the reception committee that had been waiting at exactly that position, the 4 seconds it had taken him to declare her a field casualty, the signals data in the intelligence materials, and what it had actually been telling her, not historical artillery positioning, but a live strike timeline. The console in Firebase Volkov's communications center, and what she had found there, not a single installation running an independent operation, but a node in a network that had been operating for 14 months across multiple relay points. The network relay data she had transmitted to Hargrove, and the network identifier the colonel had given her, spoken in a quiet room, while his installation burned around him, a designation for a source that had been routing operational intelligence through Firebase Volkov's 4th communication channel, the channel that had also delivered her insertion route. The thread that connected all of it was not complicated once you had all the pieces. The complication was in what it meant, and who it implicated, and how far up the chain the implication reached. She thought about Hale's face in the briefing room, smooth and confident, pointing to the map. 2 options, and he had chosen the one that put her through the saddle. She thought about the 4 seconds. She thought about the word were. The FOB came into view through the vehicle window, and she straightened in the seat, setting the shaking aside the way she had set everything else aside when it needed to be set by putting it somewhere internal where it could wait. Okafor, she said, yeah. Is Hale already inside? He came in 40 minutes ahead of us. He's been in debrief with the duty officer since he arrived. Who's the duty officer on site? Captain Driscoll. She processed this. Driscoll was the same officer who had briefed the mission clean, he had said sitting with his hot coffee. Driscoll was not incompetent. He was also not, as far as she knew, compromised. But he had run the mission briefing on intelligence that had been either wrong or shaped, and whether he had known that or not was a question she could not answer yet. I need to speak to Hargrove directly before I go into any debrief with Driscoll, she said. Hargrove has already requested your direct report, Okafor said. He's on the secure line at the FOB. Driscoll is not in that loop. She looked at him. You set that up. I relayed your request from the vehicle, he said, not quite meeting her eyes, which told her it had been his initiative and not her request. I may have told Hargrove that you would have information that was sensitive to the current chain of command. Okafor. Yeah, thank you. He nodded, looking out his window, and she let it rest there because there was more in that exchange than either of them was equipped to address in a moving vehicle with a medic working on her leg. The vehicle stopped. Getting out was its own negotiation between her will and her body's accounting department, and she came down from the vehicle onto the good leg, accepted the crutch that Cho produced from somewhere in the vehicle's equipment with the efficiency of someone who had thought ahead, and she moved toward the FOB entrance with the specific deliberateness of a person who is going to walk through a door under their own power, regardless of what that costs. She passed two soldiers from Hale's extraction team in the corridor. Reyes, who looked at her with an expression that moved through shock and relief and something that was close to shame in approximately 1 second. Davis, who stopped walking entirely and stood in the corridor and said nothing, and then said very quietly, "Sergeant Morrison," in a voice that carried the weight of a man who had been carrying something heavy and did not know how to put it down. "Davis," she said, "get some sleep." She kept moving. The secure communications room was at the end of the eastern corridor, and the MP outside it stepped aside when she approached, which told her that Hargrove's request had established her clearance for direct access. She went in and closed the door behind her and sat down in front of the secure line, and the screen showed Hargrove's face, mid-50s, lean the face of a man who had been awake for a long time and was not going to mention it. He looked at her for a moment. "Morrison," he said. "Sir, you look like you've had a difficult evening." "Sir, I have information that needs to be on the record before I go into any formal debrief." "I know you do," he said. "That's why we're talking now. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. We have time." She started from the beginning. She told it the way she had organized it in the vehicle, sequentially, completely, without editorializing. She laid out the ambush and Hale's route choice. She laid out the 4 seconds and the word "were" and the radio click. She laid out the walk to Volkov, the drainage ditch, the keypad, the console. She laid out what she had found on the console and what it had told her and what she had done about it. She laid out the colonel and what he had said and what he had given her. And she laid out the network identifier, speaking it clearly and precisely into the secure channel, watching Hargrove's face as she said it. His expression did not change. That told her something. The identifier was not new information to him. Or if it was, he was receiving it with a degree of control that was itself a form of information. When she finished, there was a silence of approximately 8 seconds. "Morrison," Hargrove said, "the relay data you transmitted from the console, we have been analyzing it for the last 2 hours." "Yes, sir." "The network it maps is larger than Firebase Volkov by several orders of magnitude. We have identified relay points in 4 countries. The coordination traffic goes back 14 months. "I know, sir. I had approximately 3 seconds to look at it before I transmitted it. I understood the scope. There is traffic in that data that references your mission specifically." He paused. "The insertion route, the intelligence assessment that cleared the northern saddle, the field casualty declaration." She held very still. "All of it," he said, "is in the traffic, referenced by the same network identifier you just gave me." She let this land fully before she responded to it, because a partial landing would mean a partial response, and this required the complete version. "The mission was constructed to route me to that firebase," she said, "not to complete the reconnaissance, to get me into a position where I was either dead or captured with the encryption keys and the communications access before I could finish reading what the signals data was telling me." "Yes," Hargrove said, "that is our current assessment." "And Hale?" A pause. "Lieutenant Hale is currently in debrief with Captain Driscoll. He has not been informed that we have the relay data." "Is Driscoll aware of what the relay data contains?" "Driscoll is not yet in that loop, Morrison. I want to be careful about what I say on this channel regarding personnel, but I want you to understand that the information you transmitted tonight has opened an investigation that is now above Driscoll's clearance level." She understood what he was telling her. Not just that the investigation was happening, but that its scope reached into the command structure in ways that made the chain above Driscoll relevant, which meant that the person or persons who had shaped the intelligence, cleared the northern saddle road, and ultimately been identified by the network traffic as directing the operation against her, were not or might not be at the field level. "Sir," she said carefully, "the 4th communication channel at Firebase Volkov, the one the identifier is associated with, is there a domestic signal origin in the relay data?" Hargrove looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said, "there is." The word landed in the room and stayed there, and Kate looked at it and understood that the thing she was looking at was larger than one bad officer making one bad call on one mission in one winter border zone. The thing she was looking at had been running for 14 months through 4 relay points in 4 countries, and it had domestic signal origin, and a colonel in a burning firebase in a hostile border zone had known enough about it to give her a designation rather than a name because he had never had a name. "Morrison," Hargrove said, "I need to tell you something before we go any further." Sir, Lieutenant Hale's official report filed 47 minutes ago classifies you as killed in action at the Northern Saddle during the ambush. It describes the mission as a partial failure contact, made no intelligence retrieved, one casualty. He paused. As of 19 minutes ago, that report has been superseded by a command-level reclassification. She waited. The mission has been reclassified as a strategic success single-operator field completion. He looked at her directly. Your authentication is fully reinstated. Your field casualty declaration has been voided, and the intelligence you retrieved from Firebase Volkov tonight has been designated as the primary source material for an investigation that has been opened at a level I am not going to name on this channel. She sat with this. It was a strange thing to sit with, not because it was unwelcome, it was the operational truth of what had happened, and she had always worked better with truth than without it. But because the reclassification was a document, a formal administrative act, and the thing it was trying to contain was not administrative. The thing it was trying to contain was the hours in the ravine and the counting of steps, and the choice she had made at the bottom of the ice, and the colonel's coat and Okafor's hand on her shoulder, and Davis saying her name in a corridor, like it was something he was not sure he had the right to say. A document did not hold all of that, but it was a start. Sir, she said, Hale. Lieutenant Hale's debrief is being conducted as we speak. The information he does not know we have will become relevant to that debrief very shortly. I want to be clear about something on the record, she said. Go ahead. I do not know with certainty whether Hale made his route choice knowing it was compromised, or whether he made it on the basis of intelligence that had been shaped without his knowledge. I have a strong inference. I do not have certainty. Hargrove nodded. Noted. That is an honest assessment. Whatever the relay data shows, she said, I want it followed to where it leads and not stopped at a convenient level. Morrison, his voice was even and direct. That is exactly what is going to happen. You have my word on that. She believed him. She chose to believe him not blindly, but on the basis of the evidence available. The 3 right questions at the joint planning session, the 4-minute deadline that had arrived at 4 minutes and 20 seconds, the fact that he had been on the secure channel waiting for her rather than routing her through Driscoll. These were small data points. They were the kind she had been trained to trust. One more thing, as she said. The Russian colonel at Firebase Volkov. His name is in the installation records. He cooperated with the intelligence extraction in the final stages of my time inside the installation. That cooperation had material impact on the outcome. We're aware of the colonel, Hargrove said. His situation is being handled through separate channels. I want his cooperation on the record. It will be. She nodded. Then I think I'm done for now, sir. Morrison. He leaned forward slightly and, for the first time in the conversation, something changed in his expression. Not softening exactly, but a shift from command register to something more direct and less official. How are you? The question surprised her. It was so simple and so specific and so outside the register of everything else they had been talking about that for a moment she did not know what to do with it. I have a broken leg and I am significantly overdrawn on every physical resource I possess, she said. But I am here. Yes, he said. You are. Get medical attention and then sleep. The debrief will wait until you are capable of sleeping through it without incident. Sir. Morrison, you did. He stopped, started again. You did something tonight that most people would not have been able to do. I want that on the record too. She looked at him, and for one brief, unguarded moment, she felt the full weight of the night, not the tactical weight or the strategic weight, but the human weight, the ravine and the cold and the radio click and the counting and the steps and all the choices that had to be made in sequence, with nothing to support them except the one decision she had made at the bottom of the ice. She felt all of it, and then she put it back where it could wait, because there was still work to do, and she had learned tonight that work was what she was built for. Thank you, sir, she said. She closed the secure channel. She sat alone in the communications room for 60 seconds. Not thinking she was past, thinking the mind finally running below capacity for the first time in hours. She was just sitting the way a person sits when they are still taking inventory, and the inventory is coming back different from what was expected. Then she stood up, picked up her crutch, and opened the door. Okafor was in the corridor. Of course he was. He had a cup of something hot in each hand and he held one out to her without a word. She took it. Coffee black, the FOB variety that was more commitment than quality, and it was the best thing she had tasted in a period of time she had lost precise track of. They stood in the corridor and drank. "How did it go?" he said. "The investigation is open. The relay data is in the right hands. Hale is in debrief." She paused. "The mission has been reclassified." He was quiet for a moment. "To what strategic success?" she said. "Single operator field completion." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Something moved through his eyes that she recognized as a complex emotion being processed by a person who is choosing which part of it to express. He chose the quiet part. "That's accurate," he said. "Okafor." She looked at him directly. "When you heard my voice on that secondary frequency, after the ravine." "Yeah. What did you think?" He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Honestly," he said, "I thought I was losing it. Sleep deprivation, cold, the adrenaline crash. I thought I was hearing something that wasn't there. And then, you told me about the strike coordinates, and I realized that whatever was talking to me on that radio knew things that I didn't know, which meant it was real, which meant..." He stopped. "Which meant I was alive," she said. "Which meant I had left you alive," he said. "Which meant I had left you." She let that sit. She did not rush to fill it with reassurance, because reassurance without honesty was a transaction she was not interested in, and Okafor deserved better than a transaction. "You went back," she said. "When it mattered, you went back. That's the part I'm keeping." He nodded, slow and deliberate the way he did everything. "I'm keeping the same part," he said. Down the corridor, a door opened. Hale came out of the debrief room escorted by 2 MPs whose presence communicated a very specific change in his status, and the 3 of them moved down the corridor in the direction away from Kate and Okafor. Hale saw her from 20 feet away. He stopped walking, or tried to. The MPs maintained their pace, and he had to choose between stopping and being guided, and he chose after half a second to keep walking. But in that half second, he looked at her. She looked back. She had imagined in the ravine, in the drainage ditch, at the console, what this moment would feel like. She had expected anger. The anger had been real. She had used it, spent it carefully in the places where it had been useful. Let it fuel the counting and the climbing and the decisions made in the cold, and no resources and no certainty. But standing here now in the warm corridor of the FOB, watching the MPS walk Hale away from the debrief room, what she felt was not anger. She felt the distance. The distance between the person who had made a 4-second decision and the person who had spent the next several hours proving that the decision was wrong. It was not a personal distance. It was a distance of consequence, the distance that opens between a choice and its result, when the result refuses to be what the choice intended. He had left her to die in the snow. She had not died in the snow. She had gone inside their base. The MPs turned the corner and Hale was gone, and the corridor was quiet, and Kate drank the rest of her terrible FOB coffee and stood on one leg and her crutch and was alive. The investigation that Hargrove had opened moved fast after that, in the way that investigations move when they have good source material and command-level priority and a domestic signal origin in the relay data that made everyone above a certain clearance level very motivated to resolve things quickly and completely. Kate gave her formal debrief over 2 days, medicated but functional, her leg in a proper cast that a FOB surgeon had installed, with the tight-lipped efficiency of someone who wanted to say several things about field splints and had decided to say none of them. She gave the debrief the same way she had given everything else, sequentially, completely, without editorializing and without leaving anything out. The 14 months of network relay data she had pulled from Firebase Volkov's console took longer to fully analyze. Longer than 2 days, longer than 2 weeks. She was not in the room for most of that analysis. She was in a military hospital, then physical therapy, then a series of meetings at levels of the command structure she had not previously operated in, but she received reports on the progress. The way you receive reports on something you started and cannot stop watching, even from a distance. The network had relay points in 4 countries. She had known this from what Hargrove told her. What she learned later was the specific nature of what those relay points had been doing, not just routing operational intelligence, but coordinating a sustained long-term influence operation that had been shaping mission planning, route selection, and personnel assignments across multiple theaters for over a year. The domestic signal origin was traced. The investigation went where Hargrove had promised her it would go all the way to where it led without stopping at a convenient level. She was not going to talk about where it led, not here, not in the document that eventually carried her name and her reclassified mission designation, in the intelligence designation that described what she had done inside Firebase Volkov. What she would say and what went on the record, because she insisted it go on the record, was this: the network identifier the colonel had given her in that quiet room while his installation burned was the thread that had made the unraveling possible. A Russian colonel in a firebase that was being destroyed had given a piece of information to an American sergeant with a broken leg and a decision made at the bottom of a ravine, and that information had moved through a secure channel to a command-level investigation and had done what good intelligence always does when it reaches the right hands. It pulled on the thread until the knot came apart. She never saw the colonel again. She asked about him twice through official channels and received responses that told her in the specific language of official non-answers that his situation was being handled and that her record of his cooperation had been noted. She held that as the best available outcome, and she did not push further because pushing further would have required more certainty about what she wanted the outcome to be, and she was still working that out. The mission designation was formalized 3 weeks after the firebase. She was in physical therapy when Okafor called her on her personal phone, not a secure channel, just her phone the way a person calls another person, and told her that the paperwork had come through. Strategic success, he said. Single operator field completion, it's official. I know, she said. She had known it was coming. How's Tan complaining about physical therapy? Tell him I'm also in physical therapy, and I am not complaining. He says you're a different category of person. He's not wrong, she said. How are you? A pause. The kind that has something in it. I put in for a transfer, he said. Different unit. I wanted to tell you directly. She had not expected this, and she sat with it for a moment before she responded. Where? Joint Special Operations Advisory. They want people with my particular combination of skills and recent field experience. They want people who were present when something important happened, she said. Maybe he said, Kate, for what it's worth. Okafor, it's worth a lot, whatever you're going to say. I should have said something before the mission, about the route, about the saddle. I saw the same thing you saw, and I didn't push. You went back, she said, when it mattered. Yeah, he said. I know, I'm still keeping that part. I'm just also keeping the other part. Both of them. She thought this was honest and right and exactly the kind of person Okafor had always been. Good, she said. Keep both of them. That's how you get better. They talked for another few minutes about things that had nothing to do with Firebase Volkov or investigations or network identifiers or broken legs, about the terrible quality of hospital food, about a film he had seen that he thought she would hate, about the specific injustice of physical therapy exercises that appeared to have been designed by someone who found suffering aesthetically interesting. Normal conversation, the kind that happens between people after something large has passed through and the world has reorganized itself around the space it had left. When he hung up, she sat alone in the physical therapy room with her leg out in front of her and the winter light coming through the window, and she thought about the ravine. She thought about lying at the bottom of it with the snow coming down and the radio clicking into silence, and the specific quality of being completely categorically alone in a way that had no precedent in her experience. She thought about the decisions she had made. Not the tactical decisions that had followed, those had been extensions of training resources applied to problems the professional working of a mind built for exactly this kind of work. She thought about the one that came before all of those, the one that had no tactical content, the one that was just her and the cold and the choice. She had decided to live. She had decided to live, and then she had decided that living was not enough, that living without purpose was a kind of not living. And she had pointed herself at the purpose that was available, and she had moved toward it one step at a time, counting, because counting was what kept the machine running when everything else was trying to stop it. She thought about what Hale had said. I am declaring you a field casualty, Morrison. I am sorry. You were a good soldier. Were. Past tense. He had been wrong about the tense. She was a good soldier, present, active, Functional broken leg and all, sitting in a physical therapy room in a military hospital with a case file reclassified to strategic success and an investigation open at the highest available level and a network identifier in her memory that had pulled a 14-month knot apart, and the mission was not over yet, not fully, because investigations that open do not close until they close, and she was going to be paying attention until they did. She looked at the winter light in the window. Sergeant Kate Morrison, call sign Frost, had been left for dead in the snow at the northern saddle by a man who had looked at a calculation and decided she was the acceptable subtraction. She had walked 2 kilometers on a broken leg in a blizzard, breached an enemy firebase, dismantled a coordinated artillery strike, extracted 14 months of network intelligence, and walked out of the burning installation under her own power. She had not died in the ravine. She had gone inside their base. And the war on that night in that border zone, in the specific hours when it had mattered most, had not gone further, because she had decided at the bottom of a frozen ravine, with nothing left but the choice itself, that it would not.